The sun was setting as Diana Johnson drove home from her job at Memorial Hospital. After 12 hours overseeing the administrative staff, all she wanted was a hot shower and the leftover curry waiting in her fridge. The radio played softly as she stopped at a red light, drumming her fingers on the steering wheel. Blue and red lights suddenly flashed in her rearview mirror. Diana checked her speed. She hadn't been speeding. She signaled and pulled over to the curb, heart racing despite knowing she'd done nothing wrong. Officer Reynolds took his time approaching her window. Diana already had her license and registration ready, along with her hospital ID badge that hung around her neck. "License and registration," he said flatly, not acknowledging the documents already in her outstretched hand. "Good evening, officer," Diana said with a polite smile. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Reynolds ignored her question, taking the documents with barely a glance at her face. "Your taillight is out," he said. Diana's brow furrowed. "That's strange. I just had my car serviced last week, and everything was working fine. Are you telling me I'm wrong?" Reynolds' tone sharpened. He stood taller, hand resting near his holster, a subtle gesture that didn't feel accidental. "No, sir, I'm just surprised." Diana kept her voice level, the way she did when dealing with difficult hospital board members. She'd been here before, careful not to appear angry or threatening, no sudden movements, keeping her hands visible. Reynolds walked to the back of her car, made a show of examining her taillight, then returned. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Diana's stomach tightened. "May I ask why, officer?" "I smell alcohol. Step out now." His voice was loud enough that a passing car slowed to look. "Officer, I've come straight from work at the hospital. I haven't had anything to drink." Diana kept her tone respectful while reaching for her phone on the passenger seat. "Hands where I can see them," Reynolds barked. Diana froze, then slowly raised her hands. "I apologize, officer. I was just reaching for my phone. Planning to call someone. Think someone special can get you out of this," he smirked. "Step out of the car. Now." Diana carefully opened her door and stepped out, keenly aware of how vulnerable she felt standing on the roadside. Reynolds made her walk a straight line and follow his finger with her eyes, performing a sobriety test as cars drove past. Some slowed down to watch the hospital administrator in her professional clothes being treated like a criminal. "Well, looks like you're not drunk," Reynolds finally said, sounding almost disappointed. "But that taillight is definitely out." He returned to his patrol car to write a ticket. Diana walked around to check her taillight herself. Both lights were working perfectly. She took out her phone and quickly recorded a video showing both functioning taillights, careful to keep the officer in the frame as he sat in his car. When Reynolds returned with the ticket, he noticed her phone in hand. "Taking pictures won't help you, ma'am. Pay the fine or contest it in court." As she signed for the ticket, Diana noticed another car with a white driver speed past them with an actually broken taillight. Reynolds didn't even turn his head. Back in her car, Diana took several deep breaths before pulling away. In her rearview mirror, she saw Reynolds watching her, making no move to stop the next car with a broken light. Driven by a white woman. Diana drove exactly at the speed limit all the way home. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her front door. Inside, she leaned against the wall, ticket crumpled in her fist. Her husband Theo called from the kitchen. "That you, babe? Dinner's almost ready." Diana straightened her shoulders, tucked the ticket into her purse, and plastered on a smile. Theo had enough stress at his job. She'd handle this herself, just like she'd handled similar incidents before. But something about Officer Reynolds felt different, more personal, more dangerous. She didn't know it yet, but this wouldn't be their last encounter. 5 days later, Diana was running late for a budget meeting. She checked her watch as she turned onto Main Street, mentally rehearsing her presentation. The familiar flash of blue and red lights in her mirror made her heart sink. "Not again," she whispered, pulling over to the curb. Officer Reynolds sauntered to her window, sunglasses hiding his eyes despite the cloudy day. "In a hurry today, Miss Johnson?" Diana took a deep breath. "Good morning, Officer Reynolds." A flicker of surprise crossed his face when she used his name. "Rolling through stop signs won't get you to work any faster," he said, tapping his pen against his ticket book. "I made a complete stop, sir." Diana's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. My eyes say different. He held out his hand. License and registration. As Diana reached for her documents, she noticed her dashboard camera blinking. She'd installed it the day after their first encounter, a small investment that might prove valuable. The ticket Reynolds handed her 20 minutes later claimed she'd run a stop sign that Diana knew she'd stopped at for a full 3 seconds. A week passed before their third encounter. This time, Diana was turning into her neighborhood when the patrol car appeared behind her. Failure to signal, Reynolds said before she could even ask. He seemed almost cheerful today. I did signal, Officer Reynolds. Not for the full 100 feet required by law. He smiled, showing too many teeth. You know the drill by now, don't you? Diana handed over her documents, feline eyes watching from neighboring houses. Her neighbor Mrs. Chen was walking her dog and slowed down, concern on her face. Diana gave her a small nod to show she was okay. Got friends in the neighborhood? Reynolds asked, following her gaze. Nice area. Bet those houses don't come cheap. The implied question, how could she afford to live here? Hung in the air between them. I've lived here for 6 years, Diana said evenly. My husband and I both work full-time. Husband, huh? Reynolds glanced at her ring. What does he do? Diana hesitated. He works for the government. Reynolds chuckled. Don't we all, in a way? He handed her a third ticket in less than 2 weeks. By the fourth stop, allegedly for tinted windows that were factory standard, Diana had developed a routine. Camera on, hands visible, documents ready, voice recorder app running on her phone. You know, Ms. Johnson, Reynolds said, handing her yet another ticket, most people learn their lesson after 1 or 2 citations. What lesson would that be, officer? Diana asked. Reynolds leaned closer to her window. That some neighborhoods are more closely patrolled than others. The threat wasn't even veiled anymore. That evening, Diana sat at her kitchen table surrounded by the 4 tickets. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged them in chronological order, then took photos of each one. She opened her laptop and started a document, typing out details of each encounter, date, time, alleged violation, and Reynolds' exact words as best she could remember them. The front door opened and closed. I'm home, Theo called out. Diana quickly closed her laptop. She hadn't told him about the harassment. With his high-stress job at the Federal Bureau, he had enough to worry about. In the kitchen, she called back, gathering the tickets into a folder. Theo walked in, loosening his tie. He bent to kiss her, then noticed the edge of a ticket peeking from the folder. What's that? He asked. Just a parking ticket, Diana lied, sliding the folder into her work bag. Theo's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't push. How was your day otherwise? Fine. Busy. Diana forced a smile. How about you? As Theo talked about his day, Diana's phone buzzed with a text from her friend Lydia at the hospital. Same cop just pulled over Dr. Williams. Black doctor, same neighborhood as you. Coincidence? Diana's stomach tightened. Outside the kitchen window, a patrol car drove slowly past their house. Not even trying to be subtle anymore. She recognized Officer Reynolds behind the wheel, looking directly at her home. She needed to tell Theo. Tonight. But as she watched her husband preparing dinner, laughing about something his colleague had said, she realized this wasn't just about tickets anymore. Reynolds was watching her home, following her. What would he do if he discovered her husband's actual position at the FBI? The patrol car circled back, driving past their house again. Diana made her decision. After dinner, she would tell Theo everything. The morning of the hospital board meeting dawned with gray clouds threatening rain. Diana dressed carefully in her charcoal suit, the one that always gave her confidence during important presentations. Today, she needed to convince the board to approve funding for a new children's wing, a project she'd worked on for months. The documents were organized in her briefcase, her presentation rehearsed until she could recite it in her sleep. She left home 30 minutes early, determined not to let anything or anyone make her late. She was halfway to the hospital when she glanced in her rearview mirror and her stomach dropped. The now familiar police cruiser was 3 cars behind her. Diana watched as it weaved through traffic, lights suddenly flashing as it pulled up behind her. Not today, she whispered, pulling over. Please not today. Officer Reynolds took his time approaching her window, seeming to enjoy making her wait. Diana checked her watch, 20 minutes until the meeting. Going somewhere important? Reynolds asked, noticing her formal attire. I have a meeting, officer, Diana said evenly. May I ask why you've stopped me this time? You seem agitated, ma'am. Been drinking this morning. His smirk told her everything she needed to know. It's 8:40 in the morning, officer. Alcoholics don't care what time it is. He leaned closer to her window, sniffing theatrically. Step out of the vehicle, please. Officer Reynolds, I haven't been drinking. I'm on my way to an important meeting at the hospital where I work. I said, step out of the vehicle. His hand moved to rest on his holster. Now. Diana's heart hammered in her chest as she opened her door. Her dashboard camera was running, but Reynolds positioned himself so his body blocked most of the view. Walk this line for me, he ordered, pointing to the painted line at the edge of the road. Morning traffic slowed as drivers rubbernecked at the sight of a well-dressed black woman being subjected to a sobriety test. Diana felt her face burn with humiliation as she carefully walked the line, arms extended. A bus from the hospital passed by, and she recognized several faces watching from the windows. Tomorrow, the story would be all over the hospital. Now touch your nose with alternating index fingers, Reynolds commanded, his voice loud enough for passers-by to hear. Officer, is this really necessary? I'm going to be late for my meeting. Diana couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Questioning an officer during an investigation could be considered obstruction, Reynolds said, hand again drifting toward his weapon. Would you prefer I take you down to the station instead? Diana completed the tests, her professional dignity in tatters as more vehicles slowed to watch. Reynolds finally seemed satisfied. You're not drunk, he conceded, but you were swerving. I did not swerve, Officer Reynolds. My driving was perfectly. Are you calling me a liar, Miss Johnson? His voice dropped dangerously low. Diana bit her tongue. No, sir. Good, because that could be considered disorderly conduct. He wrote out yet another ticket and held it out. See you around the neighborhood. By the time Diana arrived at the hospital, she was 15 minutes late. She hurried into the boardroom, aware of whispers as she entered. The board chairman, Dr. Patterson, was already speaking. Ah, Miss Johnson, nice of you to join us. We were just discussing whether to proceed without you. I apologize for my tardiness, Diana said, trying to keep her voice steady. I was detained by a police officer. A few eyebrows raised. She noticed one of the nurses who had been on the passing bus whispering to another staff member. Throughout her presentation, Diana struggled to focus. The words on her carefully prepared slides seemed to swim before her eyes. When questioned about budget projections, she fumbled with her notes, her usual confidence shattered. Perhaps we should revisit this at our next meeting when you're better prepared. Dr. Patterson suggested, not unkindly, but with clear disappointment. The project she'd worked on for months was tabled. 5 years of building her professional reputation, damaged in a single morning. Diana made it to her office before the tears came. She closed the door, covered her face with her hands, and let the sobs shake her body. After a few minutes, she wiped her eyes, reapplied her makeup, and called her assistant to reschedule meetings for the rest of the day. The drive home was tense, every police car making her flinch. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her decision was made. This had gone beyond harassment to actively damaging her career. Inside the house, Diana spread all 5 tickets on the dining room table. She added printouts from her dashboard camera, screenshots of Reynolds driving past her house, and her detailed log of every interaction. The pattern was undeniable. When Theo's key turned in the lock hours earlier than expected, Diana didn't hide the evidence. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. Diana took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about something that's been happening." Theo's expression darkened as she recounted each incident. By the time she described the morning's humiliation, his knuckles were white where he gripped the back of a chair. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I thought I could handle it myself, but today crossed a line." Theo picked up one of the tickets, examining Officer Reynolds' name and badge number. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I know exactly how to handle this." Theo hadn't said much after Diana finished her story. He just listened, his jaw tightening as she described each encounter with Officer Reynolds. When she showed him the video from her dashboard camera, something changed in his eyes. A cold, professional focus replacing the personal anger. "I need to make some calls," was all he said before disappearing into his home office. Diana sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of tickets. Through the closed door, she could hear Theo's voice, not raised, but intense. An hour passed before he emerged. "I've got some people coming over," he said, checking his watch. "They'll be here in 20 minutes. "People? From work?" Diana asked. Theo rarely brought colleagues home. He nodded. "My team. I trust them completely." He sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "This isn't just about us anymore, Diana. If Reynolds is targeting you, he's almost certainly targeting others, and we're going to stop him." The doorbell rang exactly 20 minutes later. Diana opened the door to find two people on their porch, a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and a younger man carrying a laptop bag. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Agent Chen, and this is Agent Rivera." The woman's handshake was firm. "Your husband briefed us on the situation." As they settled in the living room, Theo brought out a whiteboard from his office and propped it against the wall. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, uncapping a marker. "First encounter was March 4th, correct?" Diana nodded, watching as Theo created a timeline of Officer Reynolds' escalating harassment. Agent Rivera typed notes on his laptop, while Agent Chen asked Diana detailed questions about each interaction. Did he ever mention other officers? Partners? Supervisors? Diana tried to remember. He once said something about his sergeant looking the other way, that complaining would be useless. Chen made a note. That's helpful. Suggests he feels protected. Rivera looked up from his laptop. "I've accessed the precinct's personnel files. Officer James Reynolds, age 42. With Metro PD for 6 years, transferred from Riverside County where he worked for 8 years. "Why the transfer?" Theo asked. "That's where it gets interesting." Rivera turned his laptop around. "Official record says personal reasons, but I found redacted internal affairs complaints from Riverside. 3 separate incidents involving minority motorists. No formal discipline, but he was encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere." Chen frowned. "They passed their problem on to us." Theo circled Reynolds' name on the whiteboard. "What about social media?" Rivera's fingers flew across the keyboard. "He's careful. Public profiles are clean." But he paused, his expression changing. "He's in a private Facebook group. True Blue Shield. I can't access the content without a warrant, but the group description talks about protecting traditional values in law enforcement." "A dog whistle," Chen muttered. "There's more," Rivera continued. "I cross-referenced traffic stops in your neighborhood for the past 3 months. Reynolds has issued 76% of his citations to minority drivers in an area that's 22% minority residents." Theo wrote the numbers on the board. "That's our pattern. Now we need more victims." Diana reached for her phone. "I can help with that. My friend Lydia texted me about Dr. Williams at the hospital. He was pulled over by Reynolds too." Theo nodded. "Good. Anyone willing to go on record strengthens the case." "Case?" Diana looked between the 3 FBI agents. "What exactly are you planning?" Chen and Rivera exchanged glances with Theo, who came to sit beside Diana. "We're building a civil rights violation case," he explained. "Reynolds isn't just a bad cop with prejudices. He's systematically targeting minorities and using his badge to harass them. That's a federal offense." "Can you really do something?" Diana asked, remembering Reynolds' smug confidence. "He seems untouchable." "No one's untouchable," Chen said firmly. "Not even cops. Especially not when they abuse their authority." Rivera closed his laptop. "We need to set up surveillance, document his patrol patterns, gather testimony from other victims, build an airtight case." "How long will that take?" Diana asked. "Days, maybe weeks," Theo admitted. "But in the meantime, we can make sure he leaves you alone." "How?" A small smile touched Theo's lips. "By letting him know he's being watched too." The next day at the hospital, Diana was reviewing patient files when her office phone rang. Diana Johnson. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Dr. Williams from cardiology." Diana remembered Lydia's text. Yes, Dr. Williams, what can I do for you? Your friend Lydia suggested I call. I understand we might have a mutual problem with a certain police officer. Diana closed her office door. Officer Reynolds? Williams' sigh was heavy. That's the one. 3 times in 2 weeks, never activates his body camera. Always comes up with some violation I supposedly committed. Would you be willing to give a statement about your experiences? Diana asked. My husband is with the FBI. They're building a case. The line went quiet. Then, the FBI? Seriously? Williams sounded both surprised and relieved. Yes, absolutely. I've got dashcam footage too. By the end of the day, Lydia had connected Diana with 2 more hospital employees who'd had run-ins with Reynolds. Both agreed to give statements. When Diana arrived home that evening, she found Theo and Agent Rivera setting up surveillance cameras that overlooked their street. 4 more victims have come forward, she told them, all with similar stories. Theo nodded grimly. And we found 3 more through our channels, all black professionals in upscale neighborhoods. Reynolds has been busy. What happens next? Diana asked. We keep building the case, Theo said. And when we've got enough evidence, he pointed to one of the cameras, we turn the tables on Officer Reynolds. For the next 2 weeks, Diana didn't see Officer Reynolds. Not during her commute, not in her neighborhood. It was as if he vanished, and the relief was palpable. But Theo assured her that Reynolds was still very much active, just avoiding her now. Our surveillance picked him up following Dr. Williams yesterday, Theo explained over dinner. He's still targeting people, just being more careful about who. How's the case building? Diana asked, pushing food around her plate. Despite Reynolds' absence, she still tensed every time she saw a police car. We've got 10 victims willing to testify, Theo said. And the evidence is damning. Reynolds has pulled over black residents in your neighborhood at a rate 9 times higher than white residents. Agent Chen had set up a secure database where victims could upload their videos, photos, and written accounts. Dr. Williams had provided dashcam footage showing Reynolds following him for 6 blocks before pulling him over for a broken taillight that was clearly functioning. A professor from the local university had audio of Reynolds making thinly veiled racist comments during a traffic stop. But the most disturbing evidence came from Reynolds' past. Agent Rivera had tracked down a former colleague from Riverside willing to speak on condition of anonymity. He says Reynolds and a group of officers had a point system, Theo told Diana, his voice tight with anger. They'd award themselves points for pulling over minority drivers in affluent areas. Called it fishing in the wrong pond. Diana felt sick. And nobody stopped them. Complaints were filed, but they protected each other. The department buried it to avoid a scandal. Theo pushed his plate away, his appetite gone too. That's why we need to make this case bulletproof. We can't let him slip away again. The next morning, Diana was reviewing hospital budgets when her office phone rang. Diana Johnson speaking. Mrs. Johnson, this is Keisha Taylor. The woman's voice was hesitant. You don't know me, but I got your number from Dr. Williams. He said you might be able to help. Diana sat up straighter. Are you having issues with a police officer named Reynolds? Yes. The word came out shaky. 3 times in the past month. Last time he followed me home. Made a point of writing down my address in his notebook while staring at me. Diana's hand tightened on the phone. Miss Taylor, my husband is with the FBI. They're building a case against Officer Reynolds. Would you be willing to give a statement? The FBI. Hope and disbelief mingled in Keisha's voice. Yes, absolutely. I've been too scared to file a complaint with the police department. I felt like no one would believe me. By the end of the call, Diana had arranged for Keisha to meet with Agent Chen that afternoon. Another piece of evidence for their growing case. That evening, Diana arrived home to find Theo and his team in the living room, gathered around a laptop. The energy in the room was different, focused, almost electric. What's happening? She asked, setting down her purse. We got access to Reynolds' patrol car GPS records, Agent Rivera said without looking up from the screen. Look at this pattern. Diana leaned over his shoulder. The map showed red dots concentrated in her neighborhood and several adjacent areas. These are all neighborhoods with growing numbers of middle-class minority residents, Chen explained. Traditional white areas that are becoming more diverse. And these blue dots, Theo added, are where Reynolds turns off his dashcam and body camera. Notice anything? Diana studied the map. They match exactly with the red dots. Rivera nodded. He's deliberately disabling his cameras when patrolling these areas. Department policy requires them to be on during all traffic stops. We've also got his private Facebook account, Theo said, pulling up another screen. A judge granted us access based on the evidence we've gathered. Diana read the posts and felt her blood run cold. Reynolds was part of a private group where officers shared racist memes and complained about minorities moving into their neighborhoods. One post from Reynolds particularly stood out, doing my part to keep the neighborhood standards high. Sometimes people need reminding they're not welcome everywhere. There's more, Chen said. We've linked Reynolds to an anonymous account on a public forum where he posted details about ticketing uppity drivers. He was practically bragging about targeting black professionals. Diana sank into a chair. How can someone filled with so much hate be given a badge and a gun? That's exactly why we need to stop him, Theo said firmly. And we're almost there. Rivera's phone buzzed. He checked it and smiled for the first time since Diana had met him. Surveillance just picked up Reynolds driving past the Taylor residence for the third time today. We've got him on camera, off-duty, in his personal vehicle. Stalking and harassment, Chen said, on top of everything else. Theo turned to Diana. We have enough. Tomorrow, we move to the next phase. What's that? Diana asked. Theo's expression was calm but determined. Direct confrontation. Reynolds thinks he's untouchable because of his badge. Time to show him he's not above the law. Is that safe? Diana worried. For us, yes, Theo assured her. For Reynolds' career, not at all. Outside, the sun was setting. Somewhere in the city, Officer Reynolds was still patrolling, still targeting people based on the color of their skin. But his days of unchecked power were numbered. Diana looked at the evidence they'd gathered, the testimonies, the statistics, the hateful posts. When will you confront him? First thing tomorrow morning, Theo said. At his home, before his shift starts. We want to catch him off guard. Diana nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders for the first time in weeks. I want to be there. The 3 FBI agents exchanged glances. Normally, we wouldn't allow that, Chen began. But in this case, Theo finished, I think it's appropriate. After all, you're the reason we caught him. Dawn broke with gray clouds hanging low over the city. Diana had barely slept, her mind racing with what the day would bring. She dressed carefully in a charcoal pantsuit, professional, dignified, a silent statement that she wasn't someone to be intimidated. Theo was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, his FBI windbreaker laid over a chair. He looked up from his coffee, concern in his eyes. You sure about this? He asked. Diana nodded. I need to be there. I need him to see my face. The doorbell rang precisely at 6:30 a.m. Agents Chen and Rivera stood on the porch with another agent Diana hadn't met before, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. Diana, this is Agent Washington, Theo said. He's the assistant director of our Civil Rights Division. Washington shook her hand firmly. Mrs. Johnson, your documentation was instrumental in building this case. A surge of pride replaced some of Diana's nervousness. What had started as her personal battle had grown into something much larger. Officer Reynolds lives in Oakwood Heights, Washington explained as they settled into an unmarked black SUV. According to his schedule, his shift starts at 8:00 a.m. We want to catch him at home, away from his colleagues. Diana watched the familiar streets of her city slide by, thinking of all the times she'd driven these same roads in fear of seeing flashing lights behind her. What exactly will happen? She asked. We'll serve him with notice of the federal investigation, Chen explained. He'll be placed on administrative leave while the investigation proceeds. We have enough evidence to ensure that happens, regardless of how his department might try to protect him. Rivera was checking his phone. Update from surveillance. Reynolds is definitely at home. Lights just came on. As they drove into Oakwood Heights, Diana felt a strange disconnect. Reynolds' neighborhood wasn't much different from her own: well-kept lawns, 2-car garages, children's bicycles leaning against fences. Somehow she'd expected the home of someone with so much hate to look different, marked in some visible way. "That's it," Washington said as they pulled up to a 2-story brick house with white trim. A police cruiser sat in the driveway. Theo turned to Diana. "You stay in the car until we signal. We need to identify ourselves officially first." Diana nodded, her heart hammering as she watched her husband and the 3 agents approach the front door. Washington in front, Chen and Rivera flanking him, Theo slightly behind. A formidable presence. Washington rang the doorbell. Long seconds passed before the door opened. Even from the car, Diana could see Reynolds' expression change from annoyed to confused to alarmed as Washington held up his credentials. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. Reynolds standing straighter, arms crossing defensively. Washington speaking calmly but firmly. Reynolds shaking his head, gesturing angrily. Then Theo stepped forward, and Reynolds froze. Diana saw the moment of recognition, the exact second when Reynolds realized who Theo was, when the connection clicked into place. His face drained of color. Washington said something else, and Reynolds' shoulders slumped. His gaze moved past the agents to the SUV, and even through the tinted windows, Diana felt their eyes meet. Theo turned and beckoned to her. Taking a deep breath, Diana stepped out of the vehicle. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to walk with purpose, with dignity. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Reynolds' face contorted with a mix of emotions as she approached: shock, anger, and something that looked almost like fear. He was smaller somehow, without his cruiser and his authority, standing on his own doorstep in a plain t-shirt and jeans. "Officer Reynolds," Washington said formally, "I believe you're acquainted with Mrs. Johnson." Reynolds said nothing, his jaw working. "We have evidence of a sustained pattern of racial profiling and harassment targeted at Mrs. Johnson and at least 14 other minority residents," Washington continued. "This morning, the FBI is opening a formal investigation into civil rights violations committed under color of law." "You can't do this," Reynolds finally spoke, his voice a harsh whisper. "You can't come to my home. I was just doing my job, enforcing the law." "Selectively enforcing the law based on race is not your job," Theo said evenly. "It's a federal crime." Reynolds' gaze shifted between the agents, looking for sympathy or weakness and finding none. "This is a witch hunt. You don't have anything real." Agent Rivera held up a tablet. "We have GPS records showing you following minority drivers home while off-duty. We have your body camera being conveniently turned off during stops of black drivers. We have testimony from other officers. We have your social media posts." With each piece of evidence listed, Reynolds seemed to shrink further. "And we have this." Diana spoke for the first time, her voice steadier than she expected. She held up her phone, showing a video of her working taillights with Reynolds, clearly visible writing a ticket in the background. Every false citation, every humiliation, all documented. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "You planned this? You set me up?" "No, Officer Reynolds," Diana replied calmly. "You set yourself up the moment you decided to abuse your power. I just made sure there would be consequences." A door opened across the street. A neighbor had come out to watch the scene unfolding. "This isn't over," Reynolds hissed, his voice low but filled with venom. "Actually," Washington said, handing him an official document, "for you it is. You are hereby placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Your service weapon and badge will be surrendered to your supervising officer today. These agents will escort you to the precinct to ensure compliance." Reynolds' face flushed dark red. For a terrifying moment, Diana thought he might lunge at them. But surrounded by federal agents, with neighbors watching, even Reynolds recognized his powerlessness. "You people always stick together," he muttered. "Yes," Theo said quietly. "That's exactly what justice looks like, Officer Reynolds. People standing together against abuse." As they turned to leave, Diana looked back once. Reynolds stood frozen in his doorway, the official papers clutched in his hand, watching as everything he'd used to intimidate others was stripped away. In the car, Diana finally felt herself breathe fully for the first time in weeks. "What happens now?" she asked. Now, Washington said, "We make sure this never happens again, not by Reynolds, and not by anyone else in that department." The police station buzzed with unusual activity. Officers stared as Agent Washington led Reynolds through the bullpen, trailed by Theo, Chen, and Rivera. The police chief, a gray-haired man named Davidson, rushed out of his office with a thunderous expression. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, blocking their path. Washington handed him a folder. "Chief Davidson, the FBI is investigating Officer James Reynolds for civil rights violations. These documents outline the evidence we've gathered and the requirement that he be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately." Davidson scanned the papers, his face hardening. "This is the first I'm hearing of any complaints." "That's part of the problem," Theo said evenly. "We've documented multiple complaints that were filed and mysteriously disappeared." Other officers had gathered, watching the confrontation. Diana stood slightly apart, feeling their eyes on her. "Officer Reynolds," Washington continued, "please surrender your badge and service weapon to Chief Davidson." For a moment, Diana thought Reynolds would refuse. His hand hovered near his holster, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. Then, slowly, he unclipped his badge and placed it on a nearby desk. His gun followed with a heavy thud. "This isn't justice," Reynolds spat. "This is reverse discrimination." "No," Diana said, her voice carrying in the southern quiet. "This is accountability." The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The FBI investigation expanded beyond Reynolds to include 3 other officers with similar patterns of behavior and 2 supervisors who had buried complaints. Diana's kitchen table became command central for what the local newspaper eventually dubbed the Accountability Project. Victims gathered there to share their stories, community leaders came to offer support, and even a few honest officers stopped by to provide information anonymously. One evening, as Diana was organizing testimonies, Theo arrived home with Agent Washington. "We've got news," Theo said, his face serious but his eyes bright. "Reynolds has been officially terminated. So have Officers Cooper and Bryant. Chief Davidson has been asked to resign." Diana sat down, overwhelmed. "I never thought. I just wanted the harassment to stop." Washington smiled. "You've done much more than that, Mrs. Johnson. The department is implementing mandatory body cameras that cannot be turned off during stops. They're instituting bias training and bringing in independent reviewers for all citizen complaints." "But the biggest news," Theo added, "is that the new interim chief wants to meet with you. She's forming a community oversight board, and she wants you to be on it." "Me?" Diana was stunned. "Why me?" "Because you had the courage to speak up," Washington said simply, "and the persistence to document everything." The community center was packed for the town hall meeting. Diana sat at a table on the stage alongside the new interim chief, a veteran officer named Patrice Young, who had been passed over for promotion 3 times under the old administration. "This is a new day for our police department," Chief Young was saying to the crowd. "We are committed to fair and equal treatment for every citizen, regardless of race, income, or neighborhood." Diana scanned the audience. Dr. Williams was there, along with Ms. Taylor and the dozen other victims who had come forward. Her friend Lydia gave her a thumbs up from the 3rd row. "I'd like to introduce Diana Johnson," Chief Young continued, "who will head our new Community Oversight Committee. Mrs. Johnson's documentation of systematic profiling in our department was instrumental in bringing about these changes." The applause as Diana approached the microphone was thunderous. She had faced her fear and found her voice. "6 months ago, I was pulled over for a taillight that wasn't broken," she began. "What followed was weeks of harassment, intimidation, and humiliation. I was afraid, but I was also angry. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been treated unjustly by those sworn to protect us." She paused, looking out at the diverse faces watching her. "Today isn't about punishment, it's about making things right. About building a department that truly serves and protects everyone equally. That work begins now, and it begins with all of us." Later that evening, a local news crew interviewed Diana outside the community center. Thea watched proudly from a distance. "Mrs. Johnson, do you feel you've achieved justice?" the reporter asked. Diana considered the question carefully. "Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. We've taken important steps, but there's still a long road ahead. And what would you say to Officer Reynolds if he were watching? Diana looked directly into the camera. I would say thank you. His actions were wrong, but they sparked a movement that will make our community better for everyone, even for him. At home that night, Diana and Theo sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the lawn. I got a call today, Theo said, from Reynolds' former precinct in Riverside. They're reopening the complaints that were buried there after seeing what happened here. Diana leaned her head on his shoulder. Sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to change things. You started something big, Theo said, squeezing her hand. How does it feel? Diana thought about the frightened woman she'd been just months ago, pulling over to the side of the road, heart racing at the sight of flashing lights. She thought about all the people who had come forward with similar stories once they knew they weren't alone. It feels like hope, she said simply. A police car drove slowly past their house. A routine patrol. The officer inside raised his hand in a respectful wave. Diana waved back, no trace of fear in the gesture. This was her neighborhood too. And now everyone knew it.